What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college basketball. It is Monday, March the 17th, and we have a bracket to fill out. The goal of this video is just go through every single first-round matchup all the way through the national championship and fill out a bracket for you using a tool we created that you can have access to in the Discord. More on that in a little bit. But before we get started, the channel has seen a lot of growth recently, especially over the last couple weeks before March Madness. Anyone who's liked, subscribed, left a comment, thank you. All of that means a ton. And if you want a way to support, those are a couple easy ways to do so. And it really does help a small channel like this. So thank you. All right. The purpose of this is more of a first look, filling out the bracket analytically using some tools that can help you as you make your bracket. We will have the full marathon in-depth betting preview probably tomorrow morning. We'll see if I can get to it tonight. That one's probably going to be like a 2-hour stream, but that's where we'll do the full in-depth breakdowns for all these teams. I'm going to bring you to a bracket and preface this by saying this is going to be designed for the bracket I play with my friends, which is about 100 entries, something like that. If you play in something like the ESPN massive bracket challenge, you'll need to make more upset picks. If you're playing in just your office pool with 20 people, you don't need to pick 14s over 3s. Not saying that won't happen. In fact, every year we do see seeds, lower seeded teams upset higher seeded teams. The problem is you have to pick which one. I know that is everyone loves to come out and think they're the one that can do it, but most likely the answer is probably not. If it's a large field, you'll need to take some of those shots. If it's smaller field, you don't necessarily have to, but let's start parsing some of these matchups. We'll begin in the South, where we have Auburn taking on the winner of Alabama State and St. Francis. Auburn, the #1 overall seed in the tournament. They had that locked up before the SEC tournament. And Alabama State, they had a weird run out to win the SWAC. They were the 5 seed in that conference. And St. Francis, they are the lowest power ranked team in the entire tournament. They were the Northeast champion. They upset Central Connecticut to get here. So neither team's going to scare Auburn in this matchup. These are the two worst teams in the entire field. We'll move on and talk about Auburn more in a little bit. But immediately we get to an interesting second-round matchup between Louisville and Creighton. And this game right away is coming in with a spread that's a little more interesting. I'm going to pivot over to the March Madness tool just so you can see it right away. This is our landing page where we have all the efficiency metrics of these teams, advance rate percentages, but then we have an individual team tab for every team. And in this case, you see Louisville is a 3-point favorite over Creighton, a 145.5 total. There are other 8-9 matchups that are closer than this. And as a 3-point favorite, Louisville has a 61% chance to actually move on from this matchup. But stylistically in this game, both of these teams come in with tall lineups. They're top 60 in effective height. Creighton has probably played the more difficult competition. Their strength of schedule is a little bit better playing in the Big East. Louisville's going to have their hands full with Kalkbrenn on the inside, but they're actually a surprisingly tall team themselves. Both teams shoot a ton of threes, and they're not very good at it. They're outside the top 150. But Chucky Hepburn has actually come on a little bit more of late. So we'll pick Louisville to advance over Creighton in what is a highly contested 8-9 matchup, of course. The next game, we go to Michigan taking on UC San Diego in the 5-12 matchup. This game is interesting because you have a direct clash of styles. Michigan is second in effective height with their 2 7-footers, Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. UC San Diego is 325th in height. That extends to rebounding. Michigan has a seismic advantage inside. And then you go to the turnovers. That's the problem with Michigan all season long. They're 329th in turnovers committed. UC San Diego is second in turnovers forced. Now, level of competition needs to be parsed. UC San Diego's most difficult opponent this year was San Diego State, who's outside the top 50, and they lost. It's a great body of work. It's a mid-major body of work. They certainly did enough to be here, but this is also a roster almost entirely comprised of D2 transfers. They have 4 starters on the roster that come from the D2 ranks, which is excellent talent evaluation for the champion in the Big West. But now you're playing, like Danny Wolf is getting drafted, the 7-foot center who can shoot the ball and handle a little bit. UC San Diego is also 335 in bench minutes. One thing that's always the problem against Michigan is worrying about fouls defending the 7-footers. Vlad Golden draws fouls at an extremely high rate. So this one to me says probably Michigan, It's going to be dicey because there is that path for UC San Diego via turnovers, but it's going to be too much in this matchup. Texas A&M draws the Ivy League champion Yale, which is another interesting matchup in this game. Neither team is particularly tall, but both teams are excellent at rebounding. The difference is Yale's doing it in the Ivy League, Texas A&M is doing it in the SEC, and Texas A&M comes in fourth in total rebounding, first in offensive rebounding. And from there, if Yale makes this a game, they're going to have to shoot over the top. And they are good at shooting. They're 19th in three-point percentage, but they don't shoot a lot of them. Texas A&M is an excellent defensive team, but their lapses come a little bit from the perimeter. You just have more athletes, and as long as Texas A&M doesn't have one of the worst shooting performances that we've seen, they'll do it occasionally. They get this game done. They're 317th in effective field goals, my main worry here. But if you pivot over and look at these matchups, Texas A&M is about a 77% chance to win based on the 8-point spread. Again, if you're playing the ESPN contest or these massive contests with thousands and thousands and thousands of people, you could be a little riskier and take like 8-point underdogs, but you don't necessarily need to. One thing you'll find as you go on throughout the tournament is, like, for example, North Carolina, if they were to beat Ole Miss and then face Iowa State, they're going to be a short underdog in that game. So picking like an 11 seed upsetting a 3 is actually a lot. I guess I'll say it's less of an upset than like Yale beating Texas A&M. And fewer people do stuff like that. A lot of people just try to predict the upsets in the first round when really you can get slow seeded high major teams upsets later on that are actually more likely statistically. But our next game is Ole Miss taking on the winner of San Diego State, North Carolina. Briefly on the play-in game there, Magoon-Guath is expected back for South Carolina. So you get your rim protector, your best defender, but the San Diego State team still can't shoot at all. North Carolina has had a decent season. They've basically fallen short every time they've had to step up and play a team of high major caliber, 1A, quad A, 1A, stuff like that. They've fallen short every single time. But they've played better, and the real issue they have is size. It's Van Allen Lubin and Jalen Withers. Both of those players are transfers who had failed at previous stops. And with Magoon-Guath, you do have a very tall San Diego State team with rim protection. So that's a tough matchup. I don't know how healthy Magoon-Guath is going to be. If it's North Carolina, I'll just say they'll be shorter favorites than the other teams, San Diego State that is, in this matchup. But so let's treat this as if it's UNC Ole Miss. Ole Miss's weakness is going to be their size. They're 270th in height. They don't rebound. They're 322nd. They're reliant on three-point shooting over the top, and they're streaky because they play 4 guards. 2 of them have been shooting well in Padula and Murray. And then Dre Davis and Matt Morrell have experienced pretty negative regression this year, both around 32% from 3. North Carolina is certainly not defending that area of the floor. They're 162 3-point defense, and their reliance on mainly RJ Love getting it done over the top. But again, this is a dangerous matchup in the first round, and one I want to highlight using the tool, because if you go and look at North Carolina, they're a 1-point underdog to Ole Miss. 48% chance to win this game. If it's San Diego State, obviously that changes a little bit. San Diego State would be a longer underdog, but this is one you can pretty comfortably pick an upset here. And we'll do that, and we'll take North Carolina over Ole Miss in the first one we have so far. Next up, we get to Iowa State Lipscomb. Big news, we don't have Keyshawn Gilbert for Iowa State. I think that's just more impactful later down the road. Lipscomb's a great team. They won their conference to get here. Champion of the A-Sun, a very early tournament. And this is a team that has a pretty decent record overall. They have 1 Quad 2 win. They have an excellent player in Jacob Ognisevich. He's from Wisconsin, so I got to shout him out. But he's a 6'8" stretch forward, shoots 42% from threes, the number 33 effective field goal percentage in the entire country. So this Lipscomb team is somewhat dangerous in this game, but even without Keyshawn Gilbert, you still have Lipsy, Curtis Jones, and you have a lot of size. They're taller than Lipscomb, they're better on the glass, and they're much better defensively. The gap here is number 8 for Iowa State versus 124 for Lipscomb. I still think it's too much. I'll be looking to probably fade Iowa State a little earlier. And I do think Lipscomb's dangerous, but it's still too much. Level of competition is huge here. Probably the most interesting first-round matchup in the South region to me is Marquette versus New Mexico, because you have an underachieving Marquette team that previously beat Purdue and Maryland and has these high major wins. And then you have New Mexico playing in the Mountain West, which is a conference that has not received a lot of respect, and probably deservedly so, since San Diego State made the title game. Last year, they put an abundance of these teams, and they all bowed out very early. New Mexico is a weird team. They can't shoot very well. Neither can Marquette. New Mexico is reliant on the shot creation from Donovan Dent, and it's not always him taking the shot himself, but creating opportunities for Nelly Jr. Joseph inside. But right away, this is not the toughest matchup for Marquette. Nelly Jr. Joseph on the inside is not the biggest forward. Marquette struggles on the glass. Their 6'11 center stands in the corner and shoots threes, which is his best skill. But the defense here, I think, is still in favor of Marquette, despite the efficiency metrics telling you New Mexico would be the side. The turnovers forced, it's going to put a lot of pressure on Donovan Dent. This is about a 3-point spread in favor of the Golden Eagles, so they're certainly not safe. But the superior team overall, for two teams that are a little questionable in just overall shot making, these teams are both outside of the top 100 in effective field goal, and not ones I think can really make a run. We'll see where this comes in. Right now, Marquette is going to be the pick, albeit tentatively, in this area of the region. Next up, we have Michigan State taking on Bryant. This is a fun game because Bryant has a lot of high major players. They are the American East champion, which is one of the worst conferences in the country. But they're a team that must be spending some money because they have Rafael Pinzon from St. John's. Earl Timberlake previously went to Memphis and Miami. Barry Evans is a St. Bonaventure transfer. There's a lot of high major talent on this Bryant roster, and they're uniquely built for a mid-major. Every single starter is at least 6'6". Rafael Pinzon, the St. John's transfer who shoots 40% from three, is 6'6" at point guard. So this is, I wish they weren't a 15. If you could have given me like a week or 3 or something like that, you could have made more of a case for Bryant upsetting a team. But they're probably the most dangerous 15 seed if you are playing these really, really massive tournaments and you need to make some crazy stands. Bryant is probably a team to look at because Michigan State is still flawed. I will say they are trending in the right direction, and it's basically a rocket ship in that direction. This team is super tall. That's never been a problem for them. They're third in the country in rebounding. The problem is they can't shoot, at least on paper. 325th in three-point percentage, 151 in effective field goal. That's been a huge issue for them, and it leads to some volatile outcomes. However, since they inserted their stud freshman, Jace Richardson, into the starting lineup in February, those metrics have all trended in the right direction. He's a 40% three-point shooter. And even though Bryant has this size uniqueness for a team of this level of competition, there's still players at a low-level mid-major. And Michigan State is – some of these players are going to be in the NBA for Michigan State. So it's a pretty easy call there. We'll move back to the top of the bracket and move forward. For Auburn, they've struggled a little bit of late, but this is just too much. As far as their status in the round of 32, obviously your two opponents are Louisville. You have a 61% chance of facing them, a 39% chance to face Creighton. You're at least an 8-point favorite in both of those games. So that gives you an 80% chance to make the Sweet 16. And to talk about Auburn briefly, you just have 3 40% three-point shooters, 4 actually, if you include Chad Baker-Mazara. Depth inside with not just Janai Broome, but Chaney Johnson and Cardwell's more of your defensive specialist. It's Auburn. It's pretty clearly Auburn. This is where things get interesting when you have Michigan in the turnovers against Texas A&M, because Texas A&M as a team, they force a lot of turnovers. They're 40th overall. They don't have the exact size to match up with Michigan, but their effort does give them at least a chance on the glass against the 7-footers. They can't shoot, excuse me, but neither can Michigan. So it is sort of a blend of styles that makes sense. In this matchup, Michigan facing Texas A&M, you actually get Texas A&M favored by a point. Obviously, if Michigan having the 33% chance to make the Sweet 16, Texas A&M is up at 44% nearly, given the matchups they could potentially face. The SEC is also a conference I'm kind of just trying to macro buy on after Texas A&M coming into conference play in the early bracket projections was a 2 seed. What happened since then? They just played the best teams in the country every single night, and they dropped to a 4. Is what it is. We'll take A&M in this spot. This is where things get interesting and where you might not be making as much of an upset call as you think. First of all, there's the Keyshawn Gilbert injury hanging over Iowa State. And in this particular head-to-head, we picked North Carolina over Ole Miss, assuming they win their first matchup against San Diego State. I would have less interest if San Diego State wins. But here's where things are interesting. with Keyshawn Gilbert out, this might even come down. North Carolina projects as a 5-point underdog to Iowa State. We'll get a good glimpse of Iowa State in their first round matchup. It's not going to be easy against Lipscomb. This could come in inside 5 points. And if it does, this 32% win percentage for this individual game rises. UNC's chance of making the Sweet 16 rises from 18%. Again, some of that just because they have to play a play-in and then play Ole Miss. But these are 2 straight games where we're talking about a 1-point underdog to Mississippi, a 5-point underdog to Iowa State or less. This is an interesting upset call, and that doesn't even factor in the stylistics. This UNC team playing a little better through their size now. That's going to match up against Iowa State, who is 36 in effective height. Rebounding is actually close between the two teams. They both have problems shooting, more so on UNC, but it's pretty slight. Effective field goals 50 to 53. Inside, it's 49, 46. Three-point percentage, 92 to 61. The real difference is on defense. But without Gilbert, this does make a difference. So if you're picking an upset, I think this is a spot you could. We'll pick one here with North Carolina. Next up, Michigan State and Marquette to close out the round of 32. This, to me, is just size is going to be too big of a problem. Michigan State is so good on the glass, 3rd in the country. Marquette is outside the top 250. Turnovers, Michigan can get a little careless with the ball. That's probably Marquette's best path. Michigan State is 139th in turnovers committed. Neither team shooting the ball well, so that's not even really a feather in the cap of Marquette. And again, Michigan State trending in the right direction. It's just too much. But this is interesting. I'll show you. It's probably not the biggest upset, not as much as you might think. Marquette comes in as a 4-point underdog in projections to Michigan State right now. They have a 23% chance of making the Sweet 16. It's actually higher than the North Carolina pick we just made. There's a chance. We'll see how the rhetoric shapes throughout the week, but Marquette might not be as big of an underdog to make a Sweet 16 as you think. I'm going to back Michigan State stylistically. I do not think the matchup is a good one for Marquette, but mathematically, it doesn't shape up as being too bad. Auburn, Texas A&M. Again, Auburn is the strongest team we've seen historically in a long time. With their inside presence and their rebounding that can match the effort of Texas A&M, plus they're much larger, way better shooting with 40% three-point shooters. It's just too much. Auburn is the easy pick over A&M here. If we get this run out, I have a lot of interest in Michigan State beating UNC or San Diego State, whoever it is. And this is a pretty weak little bracket area with Ole Miss, the winner of that SDSU and UNC game, Iowa State obviously without their player. So this is a good run out for Michigan, Marquette, even New Mexico. Whoever comes out of here, this is a strong region where you could see one of these teams advance. If it goes chalk with Michigan State, I do think they get the win here again. They're going to crush whoever they play on the glass more than likely. Shooting's getting better for this team. And defensively, this team is elite. They'll turn you over and force a lot of them. Our Final Four pick from this region is going to be Auburn. Again, you can't be this bad shooting if you're Michigan State, even with the improvements, and face this Auburn defense who's frustrated essentially everyone they've played. Auburn will be the Final Four pick. It is chalky, but on that, this is the strongest crop of number 1 seeds we've seen in a while. Last year was strong too with UConn and Purdue, but it was imbalanced. We had those two. We have 4 Elite 1 seeds, and there's actually a pretty decent chance that this ends up being an all-1 Final Four. I don't think it'll happen, but there's at least a good chance. We'll move to our second quadrant. It's the West. Florida takes on Norfolk State. I don't really think there's too much to say on this. Just briefly on Norfolk to give them their flowers before we move on. Winner of the MEAC. They won the regular season and won the championship, so the rightful champion. They've got one 47% three-point shooter in Christian Ings, but still, this is not a team with any high-level transfers. I'm not expecting Norfolk to have any sort of a test here for this Florida team. Can't shoot, is what it is. We'll waste no more time. UConn, Oklahoma. This is a spot where I'm trying to do some macro buying on the SEC. This is an upset based on the calculations. If you just go and look at the tool, Oklahoma's coming in about a 2-point underdog to UConn. But again, you have the SEC feather in your cap that you can always hang your hat on. As far as stylistics between the teams, the biggest concern, I think, is Oklahoma's size. They're 145th, and they're outside the top 250 in the glass. UConn crushes the glass. They're 13th, and they're a top 100 team in terms of Total effective height, again, 13th in rebounding. And then OU is 322nd defending the inside. So, I mean, you can pretty easily make a case for UConn with Karaban, McNeely on the inside because Oklahoma can't defend it. But you can make that very same case for Oklahoma against UConn's perimeter defense, where they rank 257 defending the three, and Oklahoma rains threes. 4 players in their starting lineup that hit over 40% of their threes. They're 34th nationally in total three-point percentage. So this is an Oklahoma team that is matched up pretty well. Both these teams have their strengths. If UConn didn't play so slow, I would be interested in an over in the game just from a betting perspective. But again, not as big of an upset as you might think in this game. We'll play the Sooners on our macro buy for the SEC. Memphis takes on Colorado State. Memphis is down Tyrese Hunter. I do not think he plays in this game. That's a 40% three-point shooter for the Tigers and your primary point guard. Just tough. They still have Haggerty, who's a handful. Still Dane Danger inside. It's an awesome roster, but you just lost one of the best components of the team. Colorado State has an actual pretty bad resume as far as tournaments go. They just won the Mountain West and were red hot heading into the tournament. They have an interesting roster. People keep talking about Nick Clifford. Yeah, he's been playing college for 6 years. He had to transfer down from Colorado. He was a defensive specialist there. Since he's been playing against weaker competition, he's become the player of the year in this conference, and he is shooting 40% from three. So he's an awesome player. He's a unique mismatch. He's 6'6". He plays the wing. He's hard to defend. And this Colorado State team can really shoot it. He's not the only 40% three-point shooter. Kyan Evans at point guards at 43%. Jalen Crocker-Johnson, one of your wing forward types at 6'8". He's shooting 39%. Memphis is a team that notoriously plays down to their level of competition, and that's not just narrative. This team lost to FAU in the tournament 2 years ago when they went to the finals. They were favored in the game. They've lost games this year to teams outside the top 100, but then they also have some of the best wins. Penny Hardaway just is a streaky coach, and that's what you get when you're Memphis. This is a very tough one to pick. Without Hunter, I think this game should be probably close to a pick 'em. But right now, you're getting Colorado State as a slight favorite. I think you could pick Memphis if you think Hunter plays. I tend to not think that. If I'm picking a 5-12 matchup, I'll just say this is the one I have more interest in than any other ones. I'm going to check the spread just because I can't remember it off the top of my head and see what we have. Yeah, so Memphis is a 2-point underdog to Colorado State. This is not even an upset on paper. Colorado State should be, if you're picking a 5-12 matchup, it should be this one. If you're playing small field, your office pool with 20, 30, 50 people, Colorado State's actually not an upset right now. They're favored to beat Memphis without Tyrese Hunter. Maryland Grand Canyon, Crab 5, one of the best starting fives in the entire country. Derek Queen's an absolute wagon. Grand Canyon is an interesting team. They're the representative from this conference for the second straight season. I believe 3 out of the last 4. They play in the WAC. They were second in the regular season after underachieving. But this roster has a lot of the same components from last year. Tyon Grant Foster's still there. He's been hurt a lot of the year. But, I mean, this isn't, especially for a defender, he's an elite defender. High-level transfer, came from Kansas and DePaul. They have a lot of those guys. Jacoby Coles is from TCU. Duke Brennan's from Arizona State at 6'10". And this team has not lived up to expectations. It's a lot of the same roster from last year. So to finish second in their conference is a concern. They were 1-4 against quad 1 and 2. They have a quad 4 loss this year. I don't know what to make of it. And efficiency metrics strongly favor Maryland. Offense, 30 to 147. Defense, 5 to 46. Height, 81 to 101. Rebounding, very close between the two. Strength of schedule, 53 to 261. Not even close. Shooting, 58 to 162. Three-point shooting, 26 to 290. I mean, at a certain point, we have a 30-game sample of Grand Canyon. We can't just keep banking on regression to last year's team, positive regression. We're going to take Maryland. I'm going to take it pretty convincingly. I think Maryland might run this team. Drake, Missouri is a very fun matchup. SEC versus the Valley. Drake had an awesome season. They played a couple high-level teams too, which isn't always the case. It's a good conference, the Ohio Valley, but they played Bradley in the championship. Northern Iowa is a contender too. This team's not deep. Their best player is the D2 transfer, Bennett Sturts. They're 318th in bench minutes. But this is a good team overall, and now they have a tough ass getting an SEC draw right away. With Drake, Biggest concern I have is inside. Missouri plays a tall lineup. They're 31st in height. Drake's 330th. However, Drake has the advantage on the glass. Missouri's been pushed around inside recently, but both these teams are bad in their interior. Defensively, Missouri 185, Drake 303. Both these teams can shoot, and a lot of the offense is just so reliant on Bennett Sturts for Drake. Like, Missouri can really fill it up shooting the ball. Mark Mitchell did miss the latter part of the tournament for them, I think, in preparation for this. But watch his status. Otherwise, Caleb Grill's an absolute flamethrower from three, 34th in three-point percentage nationally. This is just too much offense from Missouri against Drake, who's going to try to slow it down and grease up this game. As far as they're the slowest team in the entire country. When you have teams that do that, it just adds volatility. So I wouldn't be surprised if Drake wins the game, but I think the SEC firepower is too much in this spot. Texas Tech plays Wilmington. Texas Tech, honestly, a little underseeded in this area. They're top 30 in offense and defense, top 35 in three-point percentage, 20 in effective field goal, and 20 in two-point percentage. There's just no stopping JT Toppin in this game, even with Wilmington having some size. Wilmington is outside the top 185 in total defense, outside the top 200 in three-point shooting. It's just a massive difference in the level of competition here. And Wilmington's a good team. I will say they finished second in the CAA, so this team didn't even win the regular season. That was Towson, but they got upset by Delaware. We'll see. I don't think this is enough. The best players for, like, this Wilmington team, they play a ton of players off the bench. Like, Sean Moore shooting he's a good rebounder. Nolan Hodge at 40% from three. He's the only player that's near that. So it's not going to be one we spend much time on. Texas Tech's going to beat Wilmington. Kansas, Arkansas, this is just so sick. I'm going to take my face off the screen. I'm realizing this is also blocked. Oh, it's actually not blocking it too much. I guess I'll leave it. So you got Coach Cal. I mean, there's an argument they shouldn't have been in the tournament. They ended up doing enough. I guess the biggest thing, they're getting Boogie Flan back. They were pretty bad with him. I don't think he hurts. They have like 7 scholarship players. So don't listen to these talking heads that'll tell you this team was 0-6 in the SEC without Boogie Flan. The SEC is really good, first of all. A lot of teams had stretches like that. Second, he's the most efficient player on the team statistically. Getting a guy like that back is not going to hurt you. Third, they have a ton of injuries. Fierro's out as well. They had 7 scholarship players for the last 5 or 6 games of the regular season. You can't tell me adding another scholarship player instead of a walk-on doesn't help you. I just don't buy it. Both these teams struggle a little bit offensively, particularly shooting. Kansas is one shooter in Zeke Mayo. Arkansas is basically none. They're 200th in three-point percentage. Both of them win with their athleticism and getting to the rim. Both teams are tall. Both teams hit the glass decently. Kansas is better there with Dickinson. Arkansas is 162nd on the glass. They're not always the most efficient. But there's a lot of micro advantages Kansas's direction. Dickinson's elite inside. Then you have a defensive specialist in KJ Adams. Zeke Mayo can shoot. DeJuan Harris is a pure facilitator. All those specialists limit this team. But when you still are playing Arkansas in the first round, it's more of a problem for later rounds. St. John's plays Omaha. This game is wild. So Omaha wins the Summit, who had a crazy run out just quickly on that. The 2 best teams, South Dakota State and North Dakota State, had debilitating injuries. Player of the year was out for North Dakota State. South Dakota State lost their point guard. So we still get a good championship of Omaha versus St. Thomas, who's not eligible for this the conference. They're still in the probationary period from transitioning up from D3. But most of the teams in this conference shoot the lights out, and they don't defend at all. That is Omaha to a T. This team is 43rd in three-point percentage, but they're outside the top 200 in total defense. They're outside the top 283 on the interior and 257 from three. More meaningful on the interior, where you have RJ Lewis and Kadari Richmond getting to the rim at will, and Zuby Ejiofor just dominating a team that's not very tall. Omaha's going to get crushed on the glass here. I wish they had a different draw because this team can light it up from three. They have a lot of excellent shooters on this team, and they're homegrown too. J.J. White, 43% from three. T.J. Osborne, 40%. Cameron Thomas, 39%. It's a great roster, but man, St. John's is going to have as many second chance opportunities as they want. So let's say St. John's hit 0 threes. I don't know if it matters. We'll pick St. John's. Florida takes on Oklahoma. The size is just too much of a problem here with Condon, Chenyulu, hand locked in, Haw. Florida can't defend the inside. It's an easy pick. We already broke down Florida outside the top 300 in interior defense. For Oklahoma to win, it's going to take an outlier 3-point shooting performance. Maryland gets Colorado State. This is it's a very favorable draw for them because you have Memphis without Tyrese Hunter and Colorado State, who's really just struggled with the competition aspect this year. And the best wins are in the Mountain West, which is never a good thing. But that team is not particularly tall at 238. Derek Queen, Julian Reese do their thing and crush Colorado State inside and on the glass to face Florida. Missouri, Texas Tech. We're going to highlight this game. It's a very interesting one. If this plays out in the Sweet 16 round, which it is a 95% chance, if Missouri wins, they have a 95% chance to face Texas Tech. If Texas Tech wins the game, it's a 75% chance to face Missouri, 25% chance to face Drake. Texas Tech comes out as a 2-point favorite. So that might be surprising to some people considering where Missouri is seated. The SEC is so strong. If you were to pick an upset in the spot, I think it is live. I'm personally not going to do it for stylistic reasons. With Missouri, again, they've been crushed on the inside lately. This is a trend from the last month or so. And on the year, they're 185th in 2-point defense. That's well outside the top 200 in the last month. Texas Tech with JT Toppin and Darian Williams inside, very effective scoring team, and they can light it up from three. They're 17th in the country in 3-point percentage. Shooters like Elijah Hawkins are really getting it done for A&M. When you have a top 20 shooting team and a mass match inside with a player of the year candidate in the conference, we'll take Tech. But just for those of you in big tournaments, Missouri, this is not as much of an upset if they get it done. St. John's, Kansas, man, what a coaching job this would be. And the matchup is weird because neither team can shoot, or at least they have their struggle shooting. Kansas has one shooter. St. John's kind of has one in Davon Smith at 37%. His role's been questionable of late. But defensively, they're two elite teams. Second in total defense is St. John's. Kansas is 10th. St. John's has so much length. That's not something we brought up in the first game at the guard position. Kansas is taller on the interior, but Zuby should be just fine facing Dickinson. It's also Zuby's old team before he transferred. But at guard, when you have like R.J. Lewis and you have Kadari Richmond at 6'6", handling your point guard, it creates so many mismatches on Kansas and a lot of teams, really. And Kansas has had a problem turning the ball over. It's not been the best year for DeJuan Harris. They're 149th in turnovers committed. St. John's is 12th in turnovers forced. It might be chalky, but we're going to take St. John's in the spot to face Texas Tech. Up at the top, Florida, Maryland. Let's look at this behind the glass and see what a hypothetical spread in this game would be. And again, if you want to look at this tool, it's available in the Discord. It's only $10 for a week and $30 for a month. You can have access to this through the entire tournament, see every potential spread that we would see in the tournament, hypothetical or not, whatever it ends up being. But anyway, so we get the Florida-Maryland game, which is right here. Florida has a 65% chance to face Maryland in this round, and they end up as a 6-point favorite in this spot. Still a 72% chance to win. That's based on historical data. 6-point favorites win 72% of the time. But this is a closer spread than you might think. And the only team that would be favored by less in this entire region is Texas Tech by 2 points. So if you're looking for upsets for Florida, and they've had blips on the radar. They had a game against Tennessee earlier this year without Tennessee's two best players, Igor Milicic and Zakai Ziegler. Florida lost, and they only scored 44 points. I still think this is probably too much against Maryland. When you look at what Maryland offers, they have good size, but it's still a different animal facing Florida. Derek Queen and Julian Reese are 6'10 and 6'9. Florida has footers on their team with hand locked in. Rebounding favors Florida. They're 10th to 73rd. Shooting-wise is where I think Maryland could make this challenging. They are 26th in 3-point percentage. Florida, 92nd. But the problem is Florida's guards are just so good defending. They're 7th in 3-point defense. So nothing's going to come easy for Maryland. We'll still pick Florida, but this is one that I've been wrestling with. I could see Crab 5 getting it done over the Gators. At the bottom, Texas Tech versus St. John's. We're going to go with Tech. This is a game. This is one we need to highlight, honestly, because it's going to be close. Texas Tech versus St. John's ends up being Texas Tech's favored by 3 points. So that might be one that's a little surprising to people, but Texas Tech has a 57% chance to see this matchup. Kansas at 32%. Honestly, we should take a look at that quickly before coming back. St. John's is only a 1-point favorite over Kansas. And the Big East is weak. There's no other way to say this. St. John's has not played a team in the top 25 this year. Their best wins are against Marquette, who they did beat 3 times. But it's still a very questionable body of work. We have data points that are lacking for this St. John's team. This is probably one that might be a little contrarian, Texas Tech to face Florida. But as a 3-point favorite, they have a 61% chance to win this game, nearly a 40% chance to make the Elite Eight because of the run out they got. This is a very favorable draw for Texas Tech, who has an awesome team. There's no shame there. Florida versus Tech is an interesting matchup. I actually like Maryland's chances more than Texas Tech, who's, despite having Toppin and Williams inside, they're still ceding some height. This Texas Tech team is 212, so you have a lot of problems facing Hand-Locked-In and Condon and Chenyulu. And Florida can still shoot the ball. You're probably just reliant on shooting over the top if you're Texas Tech in this game, which, again, Florida's excellent at perimeter defense, a top 10 unit there. With Clayton and Elijah Martin and Will Richard, who is a little banged up, we'll watch his status. It's still just too much. And plus, you have Aberdeen. Florida gets it done here. They make it to the Final Four. It's our second number 1 seed, but this is one I feel pretty good about. It's at least more interesting than the top of the bracket. We're going to go to the East now, where we have Duke taking on American and Mount St. Mary. I guess to briefly give you the flowers for these conferences and these teams, American wins the Patriot League. They were the number 2 seed. They had to play Navy in the final after Bucknell got upset. And Mount St. Mary, they finished 6th in the regular season of the MAC, the double MAC. And they pulled off 3 straight upsets to get here. They're the 3rd worst team in the field. They also have injuries. Some of their best players, Carmelo Pacheco, he's been out the last 3 games. Terrell Ard last 6. Anyway, this is too much time on the 16 seed. There's not really any threat in this contest, even though, historically Duke has had trouble in these games a time or two. Anyway, Mississippi State plays Baylor, a very weird game in the 8-9 matchup. SEC taking on Big 12. Stylistically, Baylor's lost their center for the year, so they're one of the shortest teams in the field, at least among high majors. Mississippi State is not that tall. They're 138th. And they're a weird roster. They can't shoot, but they take a ton of threes. They're 295th. They're really reliant on Hubbard at the point guard, who's severely undersized. We'll be facing players like Edgecombe and Robert Wright. So that's tricky. And then on the inside, it's basically Cam Matthews trying to erase players, but you have Norchad Omier at the 5. So Baylor's a weird team. They've had a really bad streak shooting the ball. They had a red-hot January with Edgecombe. But since then, and on the year, they're 325 in three-point percentage. So this is a weird matchup and one that's basically a pick-em. I could see it going either way, but the tiebreaker for me is just going to be Mississippi State cutting their teeth against the SEC week in, week out, whereas Baylor playing in a weaker conference. Oregon Liberty, absolutely fascinating matchup in this spot. And this is one we'll briefly take a look at because it's closer than you might think. 4-point spread in favor of Oregon, mathematically 64% chance. If you're looking for another 5-12, it's not as attractive as the Colorado State one, but it is certainly one you could pick. And these teams are a polar clash of styles. Liberty is among the smallest teams in the field. 283 in effective height, 298 in rebounding. Oregon's 20th in height, 110th in rebounding. You're going to contend with Nate Biddle and Cook inside. It's going to be a problem. But in this contest, I still think there are some advantages for Liberty, who can really shoot the ball. This team is there's some weird noise outside. I apologize. It's 7 a.m. in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and you never know what's going to happen on this street. Anyway, Liberty starts 2 guards below 6 feet tall. Colin Porter, 44% three-point shooter. Kanan Mathany's at 39%. And then Talon Peters at 47%. They also have Xander Yates going off the bench. He's a Creighton transfer at 43%. This team can shoot it over the top, and they're absolutely going to have to. The problem is Oregon's 62nd in three-point defense. It's definitely not a good matchup for this team. And then Oregon just has absolute bodies to pound this Liberty team inside. Liberty has also played some pretty good competition this year. This is not a team that's a slouch by any means. I don't have a good feel for the way the matchup goes. I'm going to default to Oregon with wins over Wisconsin and high major teams, but this is not actually that big of an upset if you do pick Liberty. Arizona-Akron, another weird game. Akron nearly went undefeated in the MAC. They had a crazy comeback over Miami, Ohio to punch their ticket. They nearly lost that game. But this is a team that plays at the speed of light. Arizona does as well, so Akron certainly capable of running with the Wildcats. But we talk about small teams. Akron is the smallest team in the country. 364 out of 364. You cannot possibly be smaller. I have some gripes with the way Arizona is playing. First of all, their coach is just letting Caleb Love take a million threes, and he is shooting at 32%, which brings Arizona down to 237 as a team from three-point percentage. Second, they keep starting transfers like Trey Townsend from the Horizon and limiting minutes for Carter Bryant and Henry Visar, who are some of the biggest players on the floor. Visar's a footer. These are the two best rim protectors your team has. But you're just giving minutes unnecessarily to players that don't project well efficiency-wise. And I wish a reporter would just straight up ask, because there might be an answer. It might be a conditioning thing. It might be an injury. We don't know. But the best roster is not played on the floor all the time for Arizona. Is that really a problem in this game? I think it's probably not. They have enough size where I'm just not really sure how Akron plays against high major teams being as short as they are. BYU VCU, this is a very strange game and one that's extremely close and one that needs some nuance and context. 2-point spread, so this would not be a big upset if VCU takes it down, but it's an interesting game on paper for a lot of reasons. VCU does have a size advantage, but rebounding is very close between these teams. The real problem with VCU is this team is not the best shooting, 99th in effective field goal, 184th in three, which is crazy because Max Shulga is an absolute flamethrower from the perimeter. But your other players like Zeb Jackson, Bamisil, they're not giving you much shooting. Jack Clark is having a bad year from three. And it's the polar opposite on the other side. BYU lights it up from three, 32% three-point percentage, or they're 32nd in three-point percentage, 7th overall in effective field goal. But the problem is they're facing an elite VCU defense who's 24th overall, top 20 in interior and perimeter defense. So it is strength on strength, weakness on weakness for both of these teams. What gets it done? I think you could honestly play VCU. They have another advantage. BYU is 2 of 7 to turnovers committed. VCU 26 in turnovers forced. You still have to play like Yegor Dennis is a 6'9" point guard for BYU. There's tons of mismatches within BYU. But if you do play VCU a big lineup by themselves, this is not actually as much of an upset as you think, and one will take here over BYU. Wisconsin-Montana, weird stylistic game. Montana plays at altitude regularly. Wisconsin has to play at altitude after just playing as long as you possibly can into the regular season. The Big Ten championship is super late. Wisconsin played 4 days in a row before playing the latest possible game to get here. Now they're playing at elevation against Montana. It's a tricky spot, but it's just not enough. Montana, they're the representative from the Big Sky, a good team, a good shooting team, not the best defensively. Even with Wisconsin playing a ton, it's still not going to be enough for this Montana team to pull the upset. Vandy St. Mary's, I wish this was a little different. I want to take more SEC teams, especially when they're underdogs, which Vandy is here. But Vandy is the shortest team in the SEC. They're 316th. They don't rebound. They're 169th. St. Mary's, that is exactly what they do well. This team is 44th in effective fight. They have a 7-footer, and Harry Wessels coming off the bench. They're first in rebounding in the country, second in offensive rebounding, 9th in defensive rebounding. This team does not shoot the ball super well, but they defend. They're a top 10 unit there, and they hit the glass. That's exactly where Vandy struggles. And Vandy doesn't have a lot of strengths themselves. They're an interior scoring team for a team that doesn't have a lot of size. We'll take St. Mary's, keep it a little chalky there. And then Alabama over Robert Morris, our Horizon League champion, should be UW-Milwaukee. I'm very sad to see it. Biggest thing with Alabama is Grant Nelson healthy. All reports indicate he's going to be back. We'll see, though. You never know. Duke, Mississippi State. Again, Mississippi State just playing a limited roster. You have a tiny point guard. Duke has so much length. Cooper Flagg is projected to play in their first-round game, according to Shire, so he should be more than fine for this game. And then inside, you have a defensive specialist. I'm not sure how you contend with Cooper Flagg, Conkunipple, Proctor, Sion James, Malawach. Easy Duke play. Oregon, Arizona. Good old Pac-12 rivalry that is no more. Let's pull this one behind the glass. You get Arizona as about a 5-point favorite, 62% chance to win this game. Overall, 65% chance to make the Sweet 16. I would love to pull the upset card and have Oregon here. But you see, they come in at 23% chance to make the Sweet 16. I think that's just mathematically too far for me, and I don't want to. I'm a little biased against Arizona, as you heard in the breakdown earlier. I don't like Caleb Love. His shot quality is awful. Shot selection is awful. And then this team has not been, I think, organized optimally. Again, would love to hear what the coach has to say about that. Wisconsin takes on VCU. This is an interesting matchup. VCU, again, they have the size to play with Wisconsin. They're 42nd, Wisconsin's 38th. VCU actually comes in better with defensive efficiency metrics, but Wisconsin's far superior on offense. You have the gap in skill, obviously, the gap in talent. Both these teams shoot a ton of threes. Wisconsin's way better at it. So it's very hard for me not to pick the Badgers, but let's take a look at what the spread would be, just interestingly enough, because VCU is a super talented team. With Wisconsin, say they face VCU, you're only a 4-point favorite here. Wisconsin against BYU, 1-point favorite. Wisconsin against VCU, 4-point favorite. Aside from Wisconsin playing 4 days in a row and having little rest and playing at altitude, without factoring into any of that, they have really high-quality opponents in the second round. I think you can pick a Wisconsin upset if you want. I think it'll be popular. VCU and BYU should be trendy, both of them, to get to the Sweet 16. I'm going to pick the Badgers. I don't feel confident about this one. Just straight up with you, it is what it is. Alabama, St. Mary's. This game would be so fascinating. St. Mary's is 359th in pace. So this is the the sixth slowest team in the country. Bama is number 1 in pace. This is the fastest team in the country. Both these teams have good size. How does the level of competition factor in SEC versus, West Coast? What about the size and the physicality that St. Mary's plays with? Does that translate to an SEC opponent? Alabama's way better shooting the ball than this team. 103 in three-point percentage, which has honestly risen into the top 30 since conference play. St. Mary's is 232. And then on the inside, it's not even close. Alabama's 3, St. Mary's is 145. And Alabama will board with you. So I think this is where the West Coast stuff runs out for St. Mary's. Bama moves on. But if this matchup actually happens, I would be so fascinated to see it. And then the run out for Duke here. I mean, who is the best team that Duke could face in this region? If you just go down the list, they're at least an 8-point favorite over everybody. They're double-digit favorite against Oregon, Liberty, and Akron. If any of those matchups were to occur, 8-point favorite over Arizona, who has some size, but they're just limited in what they can offer. They can't shoot. So, I mean, Duke's just kind of running away with this. This is a super favorable draw for Duke and Auburn. Not so much for Florida. Then we'll get to Houston. Wisconsin, Alabama, I think probably the least likely 2-3 matchup to happen, which is funny because I picked it. But again, I could see upsets happening anywhere along the way. Alabama just runs too fast and plays with too much size for this Wisconsin team to get it done. And then between Duke, Alabama, pretty good run out for Duke facing an Alabama team that's a little banged up. If you could at least some report on Grant Nelson suggesting he was 100%, I think you can make the argument, but it's Duke here for our third 1 seed. Chalky so far. Let's see if we break that down here with the final Midwest region. Houston plays SIUE. Good season for them. They're out of the Missouri Valley. Or excuse me, the Ohio Valley. I always get those two confused. But this team upset the number 1 seed in that conference, Southeast Missouri State. They kind of crushed them too. It's a weird team. They play a really deep rotation. They're 310. They do not play a deep rotation. They're 310th in bench minutes, but just not really seeing how they get it done here. This team is 266 in offensive efficiency, facing the number 1 defense in the country. It's an easy Houston play. Gonzaga, Georgia. This is a fascinating game. It is the entire metrics versus SEC. So you have one team with the infinitely more difficult schedule, that's Georgia. You have one team with the infinitely more difficult, or I guess better metrics in Gonzaga, because Gonzaga played close in a couple games against good competition that they couldn't win. And then they hammered Pepperdine and these teams outside the top 300. Hammered them, winning by 40 points. So it really boosts their metrics. With Georgia, you have the size to play with Gonzaga. Asa Newell inside can play against Graham Ike just fine. Georgia is 9th in fouls drawn. Graham Ike is fouling out of this game. Absolutely fouling out of this game. The guy can't keep his hands to himself, and Georgia forces the 9th most fouls in the country. The only thing that I'm really concerned with Georgia is this team is 205th in turnovers committed. Gonzaga is 4th in turnovers forced. That has gotten a little better since they put Silas Damari into the starting lineup at point guard. Neither of these teams is particularly good at shooting. They both score inside. Georgia is 189th in three-point percentage. Gonzaga is 147th. But Georgia has the far superior interior defense. I'm picking an upset here, and I'm going with the SEC. It's a pretty big one, the biggest one I believe I've picked so far. Let's see. Where's this Gonzaga tab? Got to go all the way to the end. Here it is. Gonzaga is a 6-point favorite over Georgia. So Georgia only has a 28% chance of winning this game. I think it should be narrower than that. Next up, Clemson, McNeese. McNeese, phenomenal roster building. They're spending a ton of money on high major players. They just didn't take anyone who's tall. Clemson's 26th in height. McNeese is 284th. I just am not really sure how McNeese stops Scheifele and Lock-in inside. They've done it in a weak level of competition. It's a better conference than it has been. But the Southland, the SoCon is still just not really that serious. You're going to need outlier shooting. I mean, Kadir Copeland, they have a lot of good transfers. He's from Syracuse. Sincere Parker from St. Louis. Brandon Murray's from LSU, Georgetown, and Ole Miss. Well-traveled gentleman there. Brian Bangou from Arizona State. Joe Charles from Louisiana. It's a good team. But this team is still pretty limited. They're a decent shooting team. They're behind Clemson, 66 to 75. They have the size limitations that should affect the glass. And then shooting threes. Clemson's 29th. McNeese is 77th. Only thing with Clemson is they did lose Dylan Hunter. He's still their sixth man. So I'm not super concerned by that. It just hurts their depth. Clemson gets it done over McNeese. Purdue, High Point. Fun game here. High Point, they're the representative from the Big South. They beat Winthrop in the championship. This is the number one team in the conference, so it shouldn't be super surprising. They play a very deep bench. They have some high-level transfers too. Bobby Pettiford, the East Carolina and Kansas failure, has finally found success in a super low level of competition. Demarion Williams, kind of the same thing. He starts the Texas Tech transfer, but he doesn't play a lot. They've just got a lot of high-level transfers. Kamani Hamilton from Mississippi State. And they're tall. They do have a 7-foot center in Justin Bodo, which is worth mentioning here. Because Purdue hemorrhages points inside. They are 348th in interior defense. High Point is 15th in 2-point percentage. Both these teams actually hit threes at a high level. Purdue's 9th, High Point is 48th. 3-point defense, High Point does trail, but they're still 115th. This is not a terrible body of work for High Point. And Purdue's a team I'm super concerned with. I think Trey Kaufman-Renn is the lead on offense. Guy just basically rolls out games with 20 points, but they can't defend. If High Point had even a remotely decent level of competition, I think I would play this team. They do have a couple good wins. They beat North Texas, who is a top 100 team, UAB, who's just outside the top 100, but they still have 2 losses outside the top 200, 5 losses outside the top 100. It's still very difficult for me to see the path with High Point. But man, I am somewhat interested in this. And if you look at the bracket for High Point, this team actually comes in a 9-point underdog. It's not quite as much as you'd think. I'm going to take Purdue, but I'm not going to lie. I'm considering taking High Point on the upset. If you're playing larger tournaments and brackets, I would highly consider this. Texas Xavier in the play-in is going to face Illinois. This is a very weird matchup. Essentially, I don't know. Is Illinois the worst shooting team out of this group? I think it's pretty clear by a wide margin. 316th in 3-point percentage. They forced no turnovers, 359th. Whoever wins out of Texas and Xavier is going to be a better shooting team than Illinois. They're probably going to be shorter. They're probably going to be worse on the glass, which is a huge strength of Illinois. And this is probably one just to reference the document and see what the potential matchups would look like. Illinois is a team I do want to fade, but if Xavier wins this game, Xavier's only a 4-point underdog against Illinois, and Xavier can really fill it up. Yeah, you're going to have to face Ivisic and Morris Johnson on the inside, but you have Freemantle. Conwell's an excellent shooter. McKnight's not bad. The Xavier team is better than you'd think. The problem is they just have never been able to do it against good teams this year. I'm going to stick Illinois in there. I don't feel great about this one either. Next one up, Kentucky-Troy. This is one I do feel fairly confident in. Troy's a small team. They do rebound well, but they should get crushed on the glass in this game against Kentucky, who's getting Lamont Butler back. Effective field goal percentage, it's 21 to 222. Just unbelievably different level of competition. Kentucky rolls. Next game, we have UCLA taking on Utah State. This is a fade on the Mountain West more or less than anything else. But size-wise, UCLA has a lot more of it, 54 to 137. They're the slightly better team on the glass just across the board. Utah State, a little better offensive boarding. But then UCLA is a better defensive team overall by a pretty wide margin. This team is 19th in total defense. The only place they've really lapsed is inside, which is a concern, but they have a racer in Ade Mara if they put him on the floor. This team forces a ton of turnovers. We'll back UCLA in this contest, which brings us to Tennessee Wofford. I'm not backing the underhand granny free throws. I'm sorry, it is what it is. In the second game, Houston got the worst draw by far for an SEC team. And Houston has an awesome body of work. Out of their losses this year, only one was out of overtime, which is crazy. Only one loss outside the top 20. But it's still a very difficult draw, whether it's Gonzaga or Georgia. And I think Georgia is a little underseeded and underrated here. But this is a team where they're going to be a 6-point favorite over Gonzaga, a 10-point favorite over Georgia. With Houston, you have a couple concerns. First of all, Juwan Roberts has the ankle injury. I think he's going to play, but it appears a little more serious than initially let on. Second, this team has some stylistic concerns. They're 296th in three-point attempts, but second in the country in three-point percentage. With LJ Cryer, Milos Uzan, Emmanuel Sharp, Malik Wilson, they're all over 40%. They're taking infinitely more shots near the rim, and they're doing it with Juwan Roberts, who has some of the worst efficiency I've ever seen inside. This team is 261 in the interior scoring. It's not just him, it's Tugler. They're a problem. And when you have teams that can shoot on the other side, I think that could give this Houston team some problems. The issue is with Georgia getting to this spot. Houston's going to turn this team over incessantly if it's Georgia. If it's Gonzaga, who's a lot better at handling the ball, I could see an upset here. But again, I don't think it's a guarantee that Gonzaga gets through Georgia. I think, honestly, Houston's a much more difficult matchup for Georgia than Gonzaga is. So this is one we'll back Houston, but I'll be very interested to see how this plays out on the court. I think Houston is vulnerable to either of these teams. Clemson, Purdue, again, this is the interior matchup. Clemson's getting by with Locken and Scheifelen over Crawford and Red on the inside. It would take an outlier shooting performance against Clemson for Purdue to get it done. Illinois, Kentucky rolls Illinois. Better shooting team. Only problem is defense near the rim. Illinois can certainly exploit that. But a healthier Kentucky is one we want to back here, which would set up an elite rematch of Tennessee versus Kentucky, a game we've seen a couple times, and one that's been interesting. I think this is a very tough one to peg, largely because Kentucky has problems defending the rim. It won't be exacerbated a ton until this point, I think. But I'm also not sure what's going on with Milicic for Tennessee. But still, you have a team that's 51st in effective height, the number one three-point defense in the country. That's where Kentucky wins a lot of the time. And they can't defend inside. So you do have a very interesting mismatch. And I do think having even like Felix Akpar could be enough for Tennessee in this game. So we'll have Tennessee over Kentucky. And then at the top, it's Houston, Clemson. I'll tell you this. I don't think this is a complete guarantee Houston were to win this game. I'm going to pull you back over there and just show you potentials. We're already on it, I guess. Houston, Clemson, it's a 7-point spread. Essentially, as long as they hit past Gonzaga, the road gets a little easier for Houston, but it's still not super easy. For example, like Duke has a much easier run out than this. But with Clemson, you have the interior presence to go against Tugler, to go against Juwan Roberts, and you have the three-point shooters to contend with Cryer, Uzan, and Sharp. So it's actually a pretty tricky matchup. I could see Houston falling at any point really along the way, and this is another one of them. From here, what do we have? We have a Houston-Tennessee matchup. I'm going to go with Tennessee in this one. Tennessee has the same caliber defense as Houston, which could really limit scoring. Houston's much better offensively, but they don't always play up to it with the amount of shots that Juwan Roberts takes. So that's where we'll go to close out this region, which brings us to our Final Four. It's Auburn versus Florida. It's Duke versus Tennessee. I'll start with Duke. This team gets by Tennessee. Too much length, too much scoring across the board on the interior. Frustrates and slightly undersized Clemson at guard. And Duke gets it done with a healthy Cooper Flag. Florida versus Auburn. We'll go with the Gators. They have the size and defensive ability with Condon, Chenyulu, hand-locked and inside to score with Auburn. And then their guards are so elite defensively. If you need to turn the water off on Auburn, you also have to do a good job defending the guards. And Miles Kelly, Denver Jones, Baker Mazzara, Pettiford, they all shoot the ball well. But Florida has the ability to do that, and they frustrated Auburn from 3 already this year. This is one of Florida's best wins. And in the national championship, we have Duke versus Florida. This is an extremely close game. I'm going to pull you behind the glass because we do have this one projected We got to scroll back to either a Duke or a Florida. If this game happens, we would have Duke -2 against Florida. Duke would be favored basically against everyone. Crazy. They're the #1 team overall in power rankings. But I think there's a chance we're still underrating the SEC taking losses when the SEC is the best conference in the country. They have the shooters to contend. But the only real difference I think here is size is a problem. We'll go with Duke. It's just too much having 2 lottery picks, 3 lottery picks perhaps, a 7-footer on the interior, depth down there. That I will say that's the biggest concern. If Malawach gets in foul trouble and Malik Brown's not healthy, do Condon, Chenyulu, Hanlockton wreck this game? They very well could. The guard position is where I think you see the separator. I'm taking Flagg, I'm taking Kahn, I'm taking Sion and Tyrese Proctor over Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, and Will Richard. So we'll have Duke as our final, and this is our first bracket breakdown. I'm not going to pick a score. But betting preview will come out soon. If you have any feedback, let me know what you want to see for that game or that contest. Otherwise, we'll be back throughout the week with a lot of content. Thank you for watching. It is much appreciated. We will see you later.